Hey everyone, welcome to the channel where I share creepy and scary stories that will give you chills. If you love horror and spooky tales, make sure to subscribe and join me every week for a new story. Let's get into the dark side together. The train doors hissed shut behind Daniel, with a finality that felt heavier than usual. He glanced at his watch, 12:47 a.m. The last train of the night, nearly empty. The fluorescent lights above flickering weakly, as if reluctant to stay alive. Only a handful of passengers sat scattered through the car. An old man clutching a newspaper, a young woman with her head tilted against the window, and a suited commuter who seemed too tired to notice the world collapsing around him. Daniel dropped into a seat, setting his backpack down beside him. The train lurched forward, and the city outside began to dissolve into darkness as they tunneled deeper underground. Minutes passed. The train didn't slow down. Daniel frowned, lifting his head from the scrolling blur of his phone screen. They should have reached the next station by now. He glanced around, but none of the other passengers seemed alarmed. The old man's paper was trembling slightly in his hands, though not from the train's movement, but from his own shivering grip. The PA system crackled, but no words came, just a distorted sound, like static dragging itself across metal. Daniel felt it vibrate in his chest, and then he noticed something impossible. The reflection in the train's window wasn't moving in sync with the passengers. His own mirrored face stared back at him a second too late, blinking slower, smiling faintly when he was not. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer to glass, narrowing his eyes at the faintly distorted reflection staring back at him. It wasn't him. Not really. The mirrored Daniel tilted his head slightly, like a predator sizing up its prey. The faint smile curled wider, but his own lips stayed perfectly still. A sudden jolt rattled the train, jerking Daniel back into his seat. He blinked, trying to shake off the chill crawling up his spine. When he looked again, the reflection was normal. Just him, pale, tired, slightly sweating, but him. The old man across the aisle lowered his newspaper and whispered something. His voice was rasping, dry, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "Don't look too long." Daniel stared at him. "What?" But the man only shook his head and brought the paper back up, hiding his face. The train sped on, the tunnels outside stretching endlessly. No lights, no signs of approaching stations, just a suffocating darkness pressing against the windows. Daniel checked his phone. No signal. 0:57. More than 10 minutes had passed since they left the last stop. That wasn't possible. He looked back at the other passengers. The woman by the window was trembling now, her head pressed harder into the glass as though she was trying to merge with it. The suited man sat unnaturally still, eyes wide open, staring dead ahead without blinking. And then the lights flickered. Just for a moment, the train car went black, and in that half-second of darkness, Daniel saw every reflection in the window turn towards him, smiling. The train lights hummed back to life, buzzing faintly like dying insects. Daniel's heart pounded so hard, he thought everyone else could hear it, but no one moved. The woman by the window was still pressed against the glass, her skin pale as chalk. The suited man still hadn't blinked. The old man's paper hadn't shifted an inch. Daniel stood, his knees trembling. "Excuse me, does anyone know what's happening? Where's the next stop?" No response. The silence was thick, almost deliberate, as though the walls of the train were holding their breath. He pulled open the connecting door to the next car. For a moment, relief flooded him. Maybe there were more passengers, maybe anyone could explain. But the next car was identical. Same dim lighting, same flicker of fluorescent tubes, and the same passengers. His stomach dropped. The woman, the suited man, the old man with the paper, sitting in the exact same positions, frozen in the exact same way. Daniel staggered backward, then stumbled forward again, opening the next door. Another car, the same people. His breaths came fast and shallow now, his vision tunneling. He turned around to retreat, only to realize the door he'd come through was gone. Just more seats, more frozen passengers. It was an endless loop. The old man in every car lowered his newspaper at the same time. Dozens of them. Dozens of tired, wrinkled faces staring directly at Daniel. And in unison, they whispered, "You shouldn't have looked." The fluorescent lights flickered violently, and the windows filled with moving shadows, like faces pressing out from the darkness beyond the glass. Daniel's knees gave out. He dropped to the floor, shaking, as the train roared faster into the void. Daniel forced himself to his feet, his palms slick with sweat. The air in the train was heavy, as if it had weight, pressing against his chest. He staggered to the nearest window, desperate for something, anything. That wasn't a repeating passenger staring at him. His breath fogged the glass. He wiped it away with his sleeve, squinting into the darkness outside. At first, he thought it was just night. No stars, no horizon, just void. But then the void moved. Shapes stirred beyond the glass, huge and slow, like something alive swimming just outside reality. Their outlines flickered, half visible, half imagined. A limb, or was a shadow, brushed against the window, and the entire train groaned as if under pressure. Daniel stumbled back. His heart nearly stopped when he realized every passenger was now turned toward him, not moving, not breathing, just watching. The suited man's head tilted unnaturally far to one side, vertebrae creaking. The woman's lips split into a smile far too wide, her teeth pale in the flickering light. The old man's newspaper dissolved into ash in his hands, vanishing before it even touched the floor. They didn't speak this time. They only stared. Daniel's mind screamed for escape. His eyes darted to the emergency window release, just a red handle above the seats. He rushed toward it, yanked it down. The glass shuddered and hissed, cracking outward in glowing spiderweb lines. Beyond the breaking window, the void seemed to lean closer, hungry. With a sound like shattering bones, the window burst open. Air didn't rush out. Instead, the darkness rushed in. It slid across the floor like a tide, thick and cold, swallowing the seats, the passengers, everything. The figures didn't resist. They dissolved into black, their eyes the last to vanish. Daniel backed into the far corner, trembling. His mind told him to scream, but his voice was gone. And from the darkness that now filled the train, a voice, not human, not language, but felt directly in his skull, whispered, "You open the door." The lights went out. Daniel's eyes snapped open. For a moment, he thought he was still on the train, until he realized there was no sound, no hum of electricity, no groan of steel, only silence. He stood shakily, his shoes scraping against cold stone. The train was gone. He was in a city. The buildings stretched up around him, impossibly tall, their windows black and empty. The streets were wide, paved with cobblestone slick with some kind of sheen, like oil, but dry to the touch. Lamps lined the sidewalks, but none of them were lit. Daniel turned in a slow circle, searching for signs of life. There were none, yet he didn't feel alone. Something about the city pressed against him. The way the air seemed to lean, the way the shadows bent slightly toward his body. Every empty window felt like an unblinking eye. He whispered just to hear his own voice. "Hello." The sound didn't echo. Instead, the silence swallowed it. Daniel began walking. His footsteps were the only noise, but even they felt muffled, dampened, as if the city itself resented sound. He passed storefronts with faded signs in languages he didn't recognize. Mannequins stood in the windows, some missing limbs, some headless, all facing the street. Their glass eyes glittered faintly, though there was no light. He quickened his pace, heart racing. Then he saw movement. At the far end of the street, a figure stood under a lamppost. It was too far to make out clearly, but Daniel could see its posture. Tall, rigid, perfectly still. He froze. The figure did not move. He forced himself forward, every instinct screaming to turn and run. But he had nowhere else to go. As he drew closer, the figure became clearer. It wore a long coat, torn and ragged at the bottom. Its hands hung unnaturally long at its sides. And its face. There wasn't one. Just smooth skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Yet somehow, Daniel felt it watching him. "WH, what you want?" Daniel whispered. The faceless figure tilted its head. Slowly, it raised one long arm, pointing a finger past him. Daniel turned. Behind him, the city had changed. The street he had walked was gone, replaced by an open void. Buildings now leaned at impossible angles, their windows glowing faintly with a dim, sickly light. The mannequins in the shops pressed against the glass, their fingers scratching silently. When he turned back, the faceless figure was right in front of him. It leaned close, its skinless head tilting, until where his mouth should have been was inches from Daniel's ear. And in the silence, a single word filled his mind, echoing like thunder inside his skull. Run. He didn't think, didn't plan. He just sprinted down the nearest street. His lungs burned with every breath, but the city didn't give him time to stop, because it was moving. The road under his feet shifted, cobblestones grinding against each other like teeth. Buildings leaned and closed in, their walls stretching and bending. The windows no longer looked empty. They pulsed with a faint red glow, like veins carrying blood. The mannequins were gone from the shops, but he could hear them behind him. Not footsteps, scraping, as if dozens of fingernails dragged along the cobblestones, chasing him. He turned a corner, hoping to lose them, but the street ahead twisted and folded like paper, blocking his path. The walls of two buildings pressed together, sealing the road entirely. Daniel stumbled back. No! The city was reshaping itself around him. Every path he chose was swallowed, folded, or sealed shut. It was hurting him. Like prey, he darted into an alley, heart pounding so hard he thought his chest might burst. The alley was narrow, shadows thick as ink, but at least it gave him distance from the scraping sound behind him. Or so he thought. Halfway through the alley, the ground tilted violently, like the entire street had been lifted on one side. Daniel tumbled forward, slamming into a wall. His ears rang. His palms burned from the scrape. When he looked up, the wall in front of him was breathing. The bricks expanded and contracted, like a chest inhaling. Thin cracks glowed faintly, as if molten veins ran beneath the stone. Daniel scrambled back, horror choking his throat. A whisper spread through the air, faint, layered, like 1,000 voices speaking from within the city walls. Stay, stay, stay. No. Daniel shouted, voice breaking. I won't stay here. The ground rippled, and suddenly the mannequins were there, emerging from the shadows, crawling from the walls, their glassy eyes fixed on him. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, limbs bending the wrong way. Daniel forced himself up and ran, slamming his shoulder against a half-open door. It gave way, and he tumbled into darkness. Inside was quiet. The air was cooler, stiller. The only light came from a faint glow seeping under the door behind him. He pressed his back against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. The mannequins did not follow. For the first time since the city began shifting, Daniel felt a moment of relief. He slid down the wall, covering his face with trembling hands. And then he heard it, not from outside, from inside the room, a soft sound, a child humming. The humming was soft, almost sweet, a tune too familiar to be coincidence. Daniel froze. It was her song, a simple melody, the kind his younger sister, Emily, used to hum when she was scared of the dark. He remembered nights when she would curl up under her blanket, whispering the tune to herself until sleep finally came. But Emily had been gone for years, buried, cold earth and silence. So why was the sound echoing here in this breathing city? Daniel's throat tightened. No, he whispered, it's not real. But the humming grew louder, clearer, until it seemed to come from the far corner of the room. The shadows there stirred, shifting like liquid. Slowly, the shape of a child emerged, small frame, long hair falling across the face. She was sitting on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, humming. Daniel's heart cracked, his vision blurred. For a moment, he wanted to believe. Emily? His voice was a plea, fragile and broken. The child stilled, then lifted her head. Her face was wrong. Too pale, too smooth. The features were like a mask stretched over emptiness. Two hollow sockets stared back at him, and when her mouth opened, the humming did not stop. It only poured louder, like a broken music box. Daniel stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. "You're not her." The figure stood. Its limbs twitched, bending in sharp, insect-like motions. The humming pitched higher, vibrating through the air, shaking the walls around them. Daniel's ears ached. His skull throbbed as if the sound was inside his head. He pressed his palms to his ears, but it didn't help. The melody was in him. And then the voice of the city joined in, 1,000 whispers overlaying the child's tune. "Stay, stay, stay." Daniel bolted for the door. He threw it open, stumbling back into the shifting streets, desperate to get away from the sound. But the city had changed again. The corridor outside wasn't the same street he'd entered from. Instead, it stretched forward into impossible geometry, buildings spiraling upward like ribs of giant beast. The sky above a whirlpool of black and violet. And in the distance, silhouetted against the swirling sky, was the figure. Not the child, not the mannequins. The thing, the presence he'd felt since the hospital. A vast silhouette, darker than the night itself. Its edges bled into space, rippling like the void between stars. It did not move, but he could feel its focus, its gravity pulling him forward. The whispers grew louder. The humming twisted into static. Daniel fell to his knees, clutching his head. His mind felt like it was splitting open. And in that moment, a thought, not his own, slipped into his skull. "You brought me here." Daniel's nails dug into his scalp as the voice echoed inside him. Not from the air, not from the city. From within. "You brought me here." His breath hitched. No, I didn't bring anything." The void shape on the horizon pulsed, as if amused. The humming child's voice fractured into static, then silence. The streets groaned like the inside of a ribcage tightening. Daniel staggered to his feet, eyes wild, staring at the monstrous silhouette. "You're not real. You're just in my head." The voice pressed harder, cold and absolute. "Yes, I was in your head. And then you let me out." Images flashed behind Daniel's eyes, memories that didn't feel like his own. A needle in his arm at the hospital, the sterile room, a moment of blinding light inside his skull, and then the blackness, a tear, a gate, something that should never have been opened. His stomach turned as realization sank in. The hospital hadn't healed him. It had seeded him. He wasn't cursed. He wasn't chosen. He was infected. Daniel stumbled backwards, but the street coiled around him like a snake, forcing him closer to the silhouette. His shadow stretched long and thin, merging with the dark geometry ahead. He felt his chest tighten, as if invisible hands were wrapping around his lungs. "You are the mouthpiece, the carrier. Through you I enter." "No!" Daniel screamed. His voice cracked raw. "You won't use me. You won't touch them, my family, no more." The air warped. The city walls trembled. A low rumble rolled across the horizon. And then, behind him, he heard screams. Daniel turned. His blood froze. At the far end of the warped corridor, he saw his house, somehow ripped into this nightmare place. Its windows glowed faintly, but inside the light flickered violently, as if fire or lightning struck within. Silhouettes of people, his wife, his son, flashed across the curtains. They were here. The city had pulled them in. Daniel's throat closed. His legs moved on instinct, running toward the house, toward the desperate cries. But with every step, the street warped, folded in on itself, stretching the distance longer. And behind him, the cosmic silhouette leaned closer. He didn't need to turn to know it was smiling. "Save them, Daniel, if you can." Daniel ran, lungs burning, as the warped street coiled beneath his feet, like a living thing. Every step carried him closer, and yet further away, the geometry folding and unfolding like an impossible labyrinth. His heart hammered not from chase, but from the screams, his family's screams. The house loomed ahead, its wooden walls breathing faintly, swelling like lungs. The curtains shifted unnaturally, stretching outward as though something inside pressed against them. The silhouettes of his wife and son flickered, distorted by the pulsing light. "Hold on, I'm coming," Daniel shouted, his throat raw. His voice sounded small against the void around him. As he reached the door, it dissolved under his touch, Liquid dripping like tar, vanishing. The threshold yawned open into a black corridor. A low hum vibrated through the walls. The same fractured lullaby that had haunted him since the hospital. He stepped inside. The house wasn't a house anymore. It was a reflection, a warped echo of his memories. The kitchen stretched infinitely, chairs floating like debris in a black ocean. The family photographs on the walls bled shadows instead of color, and at the far end he saw them, his wife, Sarah, clutching their son, Michael, both trembling. Their eyes widened when they saw him. "Daniel!" Sarah screamed. "Help us! Please!" But as he stumbled forward, something was wrong. Their bodies flickered, glitching like broken film. Sarah's arm seemed too long for a moment. Michael's face melted into a blur, then snapped back. The entity's voice rumbled inside his skull. "They are yours. They are me. They are what you made them." Daniel froze, shaking his head violently. "No, you stay away from them." The walls groaned, the shadows deepened, and behind his family, a vast blackness swelled, an infinite eye opening in the air, gazing only at him. Sarah's form twisted. For a heartbeat, her face wasn't her own, but a perfect replica of the void. Michael's mouth opened, and that haunting child's spilled out. Daniel's knees buckled. He realized the truth. This wasn't just an invasion. This was a replacement. If he did nothing, the entity would consume his family, twisting them into its avatars. And then him. Daniel's chest heaved. He had only one choice. To break the connection, the link between himself and the thing. He could feel it deep in his veins and his mind. He was a carrier. If he ended himself, maybe the entity's hold would collapse. But if he was wrong, his family would be lost forever. He stood trembling in the dark corridor, staring at Sarah and Michael as their bodies flickered between human and something else. The void's voice pressed harder. "Decide, Daniel. Save them, or join them." Daniel's hands trembled as he reached into his chest, feeling the pulse of the dark presence coursing through his veins. His mind screamed for reason, but reason had been swallowed long ago by the city, the train, the void. He looked at Sarah and Michael. For a fleeting moment, they were human again, blinking, gasping, reaching for him. "Daniel, help us." Sarah's voice rang through his heart like a fragile bell. He swallowed his fear. "I have to end this. I have to stop it." With a sudden motion, he drove himself to the floor, pressing both hands to his temples. He let the darkness inside him swell, embrace him, until it felt like he and the void were one. Then a scream tore from his throat, not human, not alien, but a sound that vibrated across space itself. Light shattered the corridor. The warped walls trembled and cracked. The shadows convulsed. The city itself seemed to howl as Daniel channeled everything into one singular point of will. And then silence. Daniel opened his eyes. The house was gone. The streets were gone. The city had dissolved into empty void. Sarah and Michael were standing in front of him. They were human again. Safe. Alive. He fell to his knees, sobbing. Relief washed over him, warm and crushing. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, hugging him tightly. Daniel looked up, and then he saw it. A shadow flickered behind Michael, just for an instant, too quick to see clearly. Yet the cold pull in his chest, the faint hum inside his mind, told him the truth. They were free, for now, but the void had not vanished. It had only waited. And in the corner of his vision, he saw the black shape of the entity, just beyond the edge of perception, staring at him with that impossible, starry eye. It whispered one final thought into his skull. "I am infinite, and I will return." Daniel's chest tightened. The cosmic horror had been delayed, but not ended. He was alive, yes, but so was the shadow. And somewhere in the dark, it remembered him. The city, the train, the void, they were all echoes now. Echoes that would call him again. The end.